All right. Well, exciting stuff. Thank you, everybody who is attending this webinar. We have an exciting topic and we have exciting guests. We'll start with. Let me actually stop my presentation. Oh, no, wait. If I learn how to use the slides and stop sharing, and let's go into this. Yeah, it's better to see people. So hi everybody. We want to discuss today how veterinary practices can go about measuring team satisfaction. We will talk about the factors that are influencing the employee well-being and the metrics that we can apply to measure it. So the topic is measuring to improve, a data-driven approach to employee well-being. But an amazing panel, and we'll start with Rebecca Rose, who is a certified veterinary technician and certified career coach. Rebecca, thank you for joining us. Please tell us a bit more about yourself.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be joining you and talking on a topic that is near and dear to my heart, not just for the last couple of years, but for decades. I've been a veterinary technician for over 35 years. This May, 35 years I've been credentialed. That's quite a feat.
Wow.
Within that period of time, I have done everything there is to do as a veterinary technician, except for a few things. But I worked mixed animal practice 13 years. That one statistic blows it out of the water at one practice, Town and Country Animal Hospital, rural Colorado. Loved it. And then managed practices, worked for the associations, wrote books for AHA on career choices. And my career has just expanded as there's been this need for and use of veterinary teams that are credentialed and all team members. So I'm happy to be here and talking on this important multiple topics.
Thank you. And we have Dr. Thom Jenkins. He's a co-founder and CEO of PetsApp and experienced chief operating officer of the veterinary groups in Europe and Asia. Thom, good to have you here. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me. I think you said it all. I've run veterinary clinics internationally, passionate about serving veterinary teams, including with PetsApp, making sure veterinary teams have the right tools to better serve their customers, but also veterinary clinic operators have the right tools to better serve their teams. And congrats on your many years of service, Rebecca. That's an impressive track record.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And myself, I'm Ivan Zach, veterinarian by trade, have built software in the past, now trying to build a group with people in mind and trying to combat the burnout in this industry by building a consolidation, which seems like sort of two opposing objects, but I'm trying to combine the two and see if we can make this industry better through creating the different culture and different purpose. So please, for everybody who is listening, please go ahead and post questions along the way. We'll try to answer them as we are going on. Depending on what platform you are, we have an amazing team on the background that's monitoring all the platforms. So just post the questions in the chat, and then we will see them here in the chat. I'm going to be monitoring that, and we'll be pausing through that. So excellent. So let's just start with a couple of slides to open up the discussion. If I will figure out how to work the technology here, then it will be amazing. All right. So an interesting topic and sort of a point of discussion. Are we in the workforce or workplace crisis? And I emphasize that because it was interesting in what I do now at Galaxy Vets. It was exciting to see that since October, well, first when we were starting, we were a little confused and we were thinking, okay, can we attract people to work in this industry because we're in this crisis of workforce? So we had 1,200 people applying for a job since October, which sounds to me that there is a different way to manage teams and companies, and hopefully we'll find some of those nuggets of wisdom. But what we've discovered in the two surveys that we've done on the burnout, that the burnout increased over the past year by 9.4%. So not only we documented on our sample of 1,600 respondents first that it's there, that's what I personally wanted to know. So there is a burnout, even though everybody knew about it. And then it grew by 9.4%. And we're doing a similar survey again this year, and hopefully we'll continue just to kind of check the temperature on the industry. but it's definitely getting worse. And what we know from comparison of turnover is that when you compare physicians and veterinarians, we're almost double in turnover rate compared to healthcare practitioners, and way more if we compare the registered nurses to technicians. So obviously we have a problem as an industry, and we're going to try to find some of the solutions to this. So I would like to maybe start with how do we go about assessing employee well-being if we haven't done it before? Rebecca, do you want to help us to uncover that?
Yeah, and I think we want to, take out this big monstrous idea of well-being being something that is overwhelming. But if we start to look at it in smaller bite-sized pieces and look at our team individually, not the community as a whole, I think we're better off in that. Some of the things that I've suggested in past articles and worked with teams too is this is not a Band-Aid. This is a long-term conversation and something that has to grow with buy-in, understanding, participation from the team itself, and simply asking them in random conversations, not just one and done. There's nothing more demoralizing than saying we're going to do something, asking for their input, and then nothing being done. But recognizing that what does team well-being look like to us in our hospital? What does it look like to you as an individual? And just starting off with those smaller, lower risk conversations and building those conversations within your team, and then moving it into, this is exciting, we're supporting each other, we see what this looks like for us. And then, as we're mentioning probably later on, those anonymous surveys or surveys that calculate that, ways that we can grow it. But instead of looking at it as an overwhelming team well-being and just far too monstrous, start out small, start off with smaller conversations, lower risk conversations. Well-being looks like leaving on time. Well-being looks like career growth. Well-being looks like drinking all of my water and having the time to do that. Taking a lunch hour. That's usually the first one that my teams want to start with, is just saying, hey, let's actually get that lunch break that we're entitled to, that's driven by labor law. But let's start there, because that's a pretty big, important piece. So, and then helping them understand the why we want to do this and continuing to build this out for a long term, not one and done. Let's talk team well-being today.
Perfect.
On to the next topic.
And when people talk about the lunch, I always want to say, what, you don't mean eating with a tongue depressor in the back of the hospital from the container? I've seen a stat recently about the lunch. I think veterinarian on average takes a 20-minute lunch break per shift. It was sort of a statistics collected, and that's not to mention the just bio breaks that we tend to not take, just in the expense of our health for to continuously serve our pets. But what are those things that can measure not just the well-being, but actually the sustainability of your team, and how can we measure the sort of the temperature check of the team? I know, Thom, you talked in the past in a previous webinar about the ENPS, but I would like to uncover it a little bit more. Can you talk a little bit about the ENPS, what it is, and how do we measure that? What are the pros and cons?
Yeah, it's a way to quantify employee engagement. And the thinking here is that employee engagement is often correlated with veterinary team well-being. If people are engaged and energized and thriving, then they're likely to be well, and vice versa. And I think qualitative measures are super important. So especially with a small team, each other, you should have a sense of what's going on with each other. And the quantitative measures are no replacement for that. So that's facing up to one shortcoming. But I had a practice owner, manager the other day who walked into multiple resignations. To him, it was completely out of the blue. And he's not the first person that's happened to. They think everything's hunky-dory, and it's not. And so how can you uncover this stuff before you're facing resignations? How can you allow people a forum to provide ongoing feedback. Employee Net Promoter Score is one way to do that. And it comes from a customer engagement metric. So Net Promoter Score is a question where we ask, how likely would you to be to recommend this product to a friend, colleague, or family member? And they're asked on a scale from 10, extremely likely to recommend, to 0, extremely unlikely to recommend. And if you take up all the people that scored you a 9 or a 10, they're your promoters, and find the percentage of people that are your promoters, and you subtract everyone that scored you a 6 or less, they're your detractors. So your percentage of promoters minus your percentage of detractors gives you your Net Promoter Score. And this is highly predictive of whether this customer is going to come back and transact with you again in the future. This same methodology has now been applied to the employee experience, the veterinary team experience, where we say, how likely would you be to recommend this clinic as a place of work? From 10, extremely likely, to 0, extremely unlikely. And I have found that when I've used that in veterinary clinics, I found that to be a leading indicator of staff churn. So clinics with the worst engagement, with the lowest employee Net Promoter Scores, have the highest churn coming their way in the future, and those with the most engaged teams have the lowest churn in the future in general. We can talk about other limitations, but one big advantage here is you just have this one question: how likely would you be to recommend? Followed up with what's the main reason for your score? And this gives people a very quantitative measure, and then gives them the ability to expand on it qualitatively, like tell you the things that have informed that score.
I love that, Thom. 2 simple, open-ended questions, essentially. Oh, I love that. I've heard that combination before, so those are fantastic.
That's awesome. No, thank you for that explanation. And yeah, always when people are collecting the surveys and data, it always reminds me about the 3 buttons when you leave the bathroom in the airport. And I always question who presses those buttons, like regardless of the experience, who touches the buttons.
It has to be a very, very clean bathroom for you to give that feedback. But I think it's a very important point, Ivan. Even though it's made in jest, the collection methodology is super important here. Really, that you can create that just tells you everything, right? If you want to get your team members to fill this in front of you in a team meeting on paper, and then they're going to hand it in to you and you're going to read it in front of them
over the shoulder.
Yeah, exactly. And that can be indicative of a very culture of low psychological safety, where people aren't able to tell you the truth, and you've got this very high score. So wherever I encounter a high score, whether it's on customer Net Promoter Score or employee Net Promoter Score, I worry, right? You see it happen first in these grade inflation happen on the customer side of things. People reporting 90% plus Net Promoter Scores. That's not a good thing. You want to find methodological ways of driving that score down so that it becomes directionally informative again. You want the bad as well as the good, right? So this is not about trying to chase the highest possible score. It's about having the most honest take on what's the temperature of my business today. And that's particularly true when you're dealing with your team, because them giving candid feedback is potentially consequential in the wrong culture, right?
That's awesome. And, it reminds me of also, it's important when to collect feedback, and when, not only from the point, how do you feel about, a particular situation, but also when is it convenient for people to fill it out, because people will just ignore it, because everybody pushes surveys, questions, giving money, fill out this survey for a Starbucks cart. But when is it convenient? And I was amazed. It's not in our industry, but I just noted this. I was in Mexico on vacation, and almost in all the restaurants, it was interesting. When you call for the check, they come in and they leave you with the feedback almost everywhere I've been. And they say, fill this out, please, I'll go and bring the device, to pay with a card. So they leave you with a task to do. And when you come back, you almost feel obligated to do it. So I thought it was very clever how they actually did it in there, because you're sitting doing nothing with the pen and the piece of paper. When they come back to collect it, you just can't say I didn't do it. It's, I thought it was very interesting. So what we're doing is we have a proprietary app inside of the network, and we're going to be serving them with a rating as they leave the shift. Did you like it or not? So basically pops in their phone, just like an Uber, 5 stars, rate your shift. So anyway, that's what we were thinking. But also we talked about the turnover in different professions. Is that a good indicator to measure turnover and the turnover rate in practices? Is this something that is important to look at? Rebecca, please.
Yes, and I was thinking earlier when you were talking about, that taking the top 90% and not including it in the bottom, but I think that's true too, because so thinking about turnover, where do we want to look at it and what would we want for our practice? First, knowing the formula and utilizing it, right? Actually quantifying and understanding that. You'd be surprised how many veterinary practice managers I've talked with. They're not sure, they can guess, but they've never put pen to paper. Like, how many separations have you had in the last year? Really quantifying it and not understanding the reasons for it, whether it was voluntary or involuntary. And then comparing it and benchmarking it to what is out there in different surveys. But I was working with one practice and an owner when he was saying we had a high turnover and then we went to 0, which was not as healthy either, right? Just because we do need to have people that lead and grow and mature. So Thom, why don't you elaborate on that? We do want to have a certain level of turnover.
Yeah, no, I just think that's a great point, that the ideal number is not 0, is not keep everyone, because some people are going to be the wrong fit and they're going to be able to do their best work somewhere else. And recognizing that and confronting that is also a challenge of leadership that we'd be doing the disservice to our teams by avoiding that. But I think you made a really good point on the rate at which people respond to surveys, Ivan, just to take it back one step, because there's so much data here that we collect, and it's actually really easy to collect just little, because people don't know where to start, and they worry a bit too much about which is the right metric, which is the wrong metric. I did a dissertation on this about, again, it was customer feedback, but I found that just the willingness of a customer to take time, invest time in giving feedback, correlated with the overall feedback score of the vet. So the survey return rate, the survey completion rate, correlated with the actual measure of satisfaction and engagement. And I think you see the same with veterinary teams. A veterinary team's willingness to actually invest time in the rest of the team, in the company, in the culture, by giving feedback is in some ways correlated with their engagement in that company. So that's one piece. And then to come on to the actual question of staff churn, I think Rebecca's right. Like, we have to be honest with ourselves. And again, just generally finding some measure and operating against that measure is better than a purely qualitative, I feel like things are fine. So even if staff churn is all you have, working to that and working to improve that is a good measure. And the way you do that is the number of employees at the start of the period minus the number of employees at the end of the period, divided by the average number of employees across the period, will give you some measure of your churn. And so say your churn is 10%, 20%. You can calculate the average employee, veterinary team member lifetime with you, so the average length of service with you, by just taking the inverse of the churn. So 1 divided by your churn percentage. So if your churn is 10%, that means the average employee lifetime with you is 10 years. And having a sense for these numbers and what they mean to your business really makes it more palpable and more actionable. It's like, oh, okay, my churn's 33%. Is that good or bad? Well, that depends. How much do you want to have to onboard a new team member every 3 years? For every team member, you're going to replace every team member every 3 years. Is that a good thing for your business? In most cases in veterinary, probably not, because there's a ramp up time, and there's going to be we talk about customer lifetime value. You've got to think about your employee lifetime value. What's going to be the return on investing in this team member?
Rebecca,
did you want to add something?
Oh gosh, so much here. So many different ideas to be elaborating on. One, for coming back to that, really being objective as to what this looks like. So when you are saying, I'm going to put pen to paper and I'm really going to look at that, you also have to include those team members that you hired and they didn't show up. How many times has that happened? Or you hired and they were there for 2 weeks, you still got to count them, right? So really being clear as to what this looks like, and then looking at it deeper into those departments. So, and then involuntary. Once you have a handle on what the number is, saying, okay, more why to do that. And you made a comment too about filling out those surveys. So if we ask a team member or team members to fill out a survey, and they do, and they're like, yeah, this is the first one. I want my voice to be heard. This is fantastic. And nothing is done. Nothing is done 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 months, demoralizing. But if we learn as a team that we're asked, that we have been heard, and that there is action taken in that, that's pumping us up. That is really supporting us. Definitely. And we feel a part of it.
Yeah, identifying those quick wins and acting against them to encourage the team that this is a process that of iterative improvement. You can actually, through this process, train your team to give more actionable feedback. Mm-hmm. That's the other thing. As you can see, this is the feedback that I received that I was actually able to act on. This feedback is directionally useful, but I'm not exactly sure how to act on it. And so the team sees the kind of, this is the feedback that led to this improvement. Mm-hmm. And that creates this positive reinforcement of, oh, okay, so if I want something to change around here, that's how I frame my feedback. And it just creates this feedback culture that becomes super actionable, super iterative, and you're just continuously improving.
And if anyone knows me, celebrating those successes, small successes, big successes. So saying, this is a goal of ours. It came out of what you told us during this survey. And look at, this is where we're moving that needle towards achieving that. And we achieved it. Celebrate it.
Awesome. Well, we talked about some quantitative, but what are the qualitative questions that we can ask in the surveys? And you started talking about this, Rebecca, but are there things that we want to ask our teams aside from just, what's the number 1 to 10, but other specific questions that you would be recommending to clinics to collect as a survey in the feedback?
So I'll start, just things that came to mind right away, included, do you feel heard? And you have to help them understand, what does being heard meant? Being heard doesn't mean that we're making all the changes, it's that you're being heard. That is this a place of psychological safety, which they're going to say yes or no, depending on how safe they feel, right? And even helping them build what I call lower risk conversation questions to higher risk conversation questions, because we can't just dump on them things that they've never considered before. When I'm working with teams, oftentimes I use that approach, and it's helping them recognize, I'm just going to use this as an example, probably not the best one for this, but we're going to have reviews in which team members review each other. That is hugely scary. We haven't been taught how to be given feedback. We've received feedback. We generally hated it because it caused beads of sweat across our forehead. But in these circumstances, and building up on that survey piece is, okay, if we want us to have shared surveys and for us all to review each other in different capacities, this is how we're going to do that. I'm just not going to throw it on you. So even when we're building these surveys from lower risk, higher risk, building the engagement, building the support, and more people filling it out truthfully, takes time. Again, I'm not going to throw them the high risk conversation. What are we going to do about embezzlement with our team? Oh, we're going to throw them some lower risk conversations and lower risk survey items until we can get to these tougher questions.
How many suggestions on the qualitative questions?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful to separate what you're measuring and when you're measuring it. Both are important, but what we know from surveys is they again become self-reinforcing. So if you ask a question that triggers positive feedback, people tend to reinforce the same positive feedback. And what you'll find is on a multi-question survey, all responses basically correlate. So you've effectively asked the same thing 10 times. So like with a net promoter score, employee net promoter score, I'd be disciplined just about asking, how likely would you be to recommend, what's the main reason for your score, and ending it there, right? That's a discrete data point. But in in-person meetings, in 360-degree reviews, the questions you ask communicate and reinforce and create culture, because it shows, what do we care about around here? And one question that I found is a really useful question to ask, both yourself and your team, is who wouldn't want to work here? There's this strategy of inversion that when you have a problem, a really cool strategic technique is just to turn it on its head. So we're trying to attract people here, but who wouldn't want to work here? And if your team can't answer that question succinctly, and you're struggling to answer it, you have a bit of a cultural vacuum, right? So, and this is something that I think some of the larger veterinary groups struggle with, is they want to be the employer of choice. But the question is, whose employer of choice? Because the veterinary professions are not a monolith. We're not all the same, right? And in trying to appeal to everyone, you'll end up not particularly appealing to anyone. And so you need to know who your target audience is. You know, who wouldn't want to work here? And let's say, okay, we understand the directions of compromise about working in this connect. We also understand what's great about it, and now we know who are the right people to plug in here and avoid what Rebecca said at the start, which is one of the most common causes of staff churn is failed onboarding. They haven't been onboarded, and I think a big part of that is poor selection. You know, we cared more about having a bum on a seat than actually having the right person in that place.
And not expressing and using our team's values, vision, and mission to help drive that hiring process. Coming back to the idea, does your team understand their values, shared values? Do they understand the vision for this practice? And is there common, which is what we're talking about, that purpose-driven team? And is it shared? And who defined that? And has it been evaluated recently? Nothing like a global pandemic to put you into a place for reviewing and elevating and doing together as a team, looking at your values, vision, and mission.
Can't agree more. When you said, Tom, about the failure of onboarding, that's a process, but also failure of selection. The typical interviews that I've seen is, what's your skills, what's your experience, the years, in the business. It's more kind of transactional stuff, like what can you do, but not do you fit. That's a very important thing. And what I've been doing in the last 3-4 companies, it's been like heavily utilized methodological traction by Gina Wickman. And basically they have this framework of people analyzer, which they and I have used to hire, fire, and review people. So every 3 months, let's say at Galaxy, what we do, so every 3 months there's a survey, and then you and your reports fill out the so they split it into 2 components: right people in the right place. So right people is fitness with your core values. It's not, and core values is not something that is right or wrong. It's just whether you fit or not. And if the 5 core values or 7 or how many you have do not resonate with the people or their behavior, because to get a job, you could say, absolutely, I love all of them. But then what we do in our weekly level 10 meeting, which is sort of a company pulse, we talk about every meeting. We talk about, can you name the representation of core value within the last week in the organization by anybody? So it's just a reiteration of that mission, vision, and core values. So that's the first part, is, are you the right person? And continuously check on that at least once a quarter. And the second part is, are you in the right place? Right person in the right place. And right place, by their methodology, the easiest thing is, there's 3 questions. Do you get it? Do you want it? And do you have capacity or capability to do it? Because there's a lot of people that want it, but don't have capacity. There's a lot of people that don't want it, but get it. So only all 3 pluses on those 3 questions makes a successful person being in the right place. So
Ivan, I want to elaborate on that, because when you're talking about this, my face just, I don't know if you saw, but the broadest smile came across my face, because I have to show you in the background, I'm blurred. So I just helped with my team do strategic planning for the next 6 months. And because we do hire that way for our core values, vision, and mission within Lap of Love. And so, I'm managing a team. It's a small team, but we do feel like we are on the same bus in the right seats with the right driver. And these are values that might feel really cold and team members might not get it, but once you start really living it and breathing it and bring it into your daily conversations, oh my gosh, it really does help a succinct team thrive. When they know where they're going, who's driving, what's the vision, how do they participate in that? Back to that autonomy, mastery. Oh my gosh, and what's the third one? Because I did watch the TED video.
Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. We'll talk about that in a second. I just wanted to add one more thing to what you both guys said about the actionable metrics, because there's tons of stuff you can measure. But if at the end of the day you're looking at it, I always talk about the fattest cat in the practice. What's the heaviest, fattest cat we've seen in the last 3 months? 12 kilograms. Okay, what does that mean? Nothing. That's a number. So it's the metrics need to be actionable, and then the way that I see it in the clinic is that the surveys, let's say your net promoter score is low. So then instead of going, okay, how do I fix it? You ask the team that provided you with the feedback and say why. And then when they tell you why, you act on it. So that's the full cycle in the loop where they understand that what they say creates a change, and then they can feel it. So that's a very important thing that a lot of people overlook, or some companies would have an idea box. I'm sure that we've seen it. It's the dusty thing that everybody throws ideas and then it's just dumped in the garbage and then put back. So, and how do you decipher it? Because you get people really excited about that particular initiative. So what we do, we have a software product that we use, actually was taken from the software world, from the feature sort of selection, and we adapted it for the clinic. So essentially you can throw ideas, but digitally. And then there's a framework how ideas are filtered based on the purpose of the company, mission, vision, and the strategy for this quarter. And if it does fit into the strategy, then person is elevated and allowed to actually create that idea and bring it to life, and then actually act on it. And you just support the person through the process. So I think it's really, really important to encourage people providing feedback, but then act on it. So I just wanted to.
Our team members have so many ideas and opportunities to improve. Asking them needs to be one of the first places you go.
Yeah, and I think also important to understand that there are two types of feedback. There's relational feedback and there's transactional feedback. And so there's one of the types of feedback will tell you about how someone feels overall about everything in their relationship with you. And one will tell them about how they feel today or in this moment or in the last hour, right? And both those types of feedback are important. So I always go back to the customer lens, because I think we're used to thinking about the customer journey, but so many of the tools that we apply to improving the customer journey, we can just replicate those in our approach to our teams. So a net promoter score is a great relational measure. If you saved a pet's life last week, and then you keep that same pet owner waiting 10 minutes more than usual this week, they're probably still going to be a promoter. They'll probably still love you for, not everyone, but most pet owners, they're still going to love you for having saved their pet's life. What you're going to do though, is you're going to miss out on the feedback from that advocate that could have given you the early warning that your waiting times are creeping upwards, right? And maybe we should translate 10 minutes into 3 hours with current waiting times where they are. But you get the idea that you're missing out on some transactional data that is exactly the right person to get that insight from. So by laying on transactional metrics, you can uncover some more detail that is hyper actionable, like right now. And so you can do the same with your team. At PetsApp, for pet owners, we collect customer effort score. It asks them how easy was it for you to address your issue today. And so we're trying to layer on convenience on top of this high trust touch point of the veterinary clinic. But you can do the same with your team. You can think of this concept of employee effort score. You've got jobs to get done. How easy is it to do them? Now, the fact that the blood machine is kind of wonky and it takes me a bit longer to separate the plasma or whatever it might be, doesn't mean I hate the company and never want to work here again, or wouldn't recommend it to the team, but it would save me some time. So collecting the relational measure, but also collecting the transactional measures, I think is important to get that mix right.
Yep, absolutely. I want to dive into what that Rebecca took us into, the Daniel Pink, and that's been my favorite book for the last couple of months. So Daniel Pink writes about the motivation and intrinsic motivation of people, and the interesting thing that he discovered from his studies and multiple studies was that intellectual employees, which is for the most part, everybody who works at the veterinary clinics, are not that motivated by money as much as by actually doing what they love. And they love working in the industry. We can see it. The interesting thing is that our industry has been motivating people with money and trying to drive by commission-based pay. And the more you do off blood work or something, then the more you're going to be paid. And repeatedly, the science shows that that actually does not motivate people. So what they condense it down to is that people are motivated by having three components, and they're autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So essentially, autonomy being having the self-direction in what you do, so not being micromanaged. And mastery is sort of urge to get new skills and better at what you do because you love doing that. And then having the purpose behind it as the overarching sort of North Star. And there is a way to measure autonomy, since we were talking about the measurable metrics. And it's also through the survey, but essentially from 0 to 10, ask your employees how much autonomy they have in the tasks they perform, in the team, with the time and the technique, how they do their job. And then as a summary, you will get this feedback on how much autonomy you have. But what are the ways, and do you guys, can you think about how can we give more autonomy to our vet hospital employees, whether it's CSRs, whether it's technicians, whether it's kennel attendants or veterinarians? What do you think is possible, and how can we stop micromanaging? I can think of one before you jump in, is the veterinarian who is standing over the shoulder of technician and saying, is the blood work ready? Is the blood work ready? Is the blood work ready? So that's one of them. But what do you guys think? How can we provide more autonomy?
I'm happy to start. We talk a lot about the tyranny of the telephone. And I was guilty of it when I was running practices too, where you'd say you got to answer the phone within 3 rings. Right. And that's because we don't know if there could be an emergency on the other end or whether it's a relatively trivial issue. And so because we force our teams through using this tool to treat everything as an emergency, it means they don't have the control over their own workflows. People not having control over their own workflows is not having autonomy. And so it creates this high stress situation where everything has to be treated as though it's an emergency, when in fact the majority of things aren't. That feels like an untenable situation. So there's lots of times where there's this concept of jobs to be done that users of a product, which you can consider your veterinary team members as users of your product, which is your company culture and your clinic's facilities, are being forced to try and get too many jobs done through a narrow set of tools. So giving team members a selection of tools that gives them more autonomy, because they then get to choose, which tool am I going to use for what job, and finding ways for them to be able to actually filter tasks and prioritize at a glance and decide when I'm going to work on what, and giving them longer lead time. So instead of 3 rings to answer their phone, give them an hour or 2 to respond to non-urgent issues. Doing things like that gives them more autonomy, rescues the veterinary lunchtime, and just leads to a happier, more productive workplace. So I think a lot of it is the tooling of a veterinary clinic that we need to look at.
Becca?
That's a big one for you. So keeping in mind the first time. So I have a question, because when I was looking at these ideas, and I've used autonomy in various articles, I was thinking, yeah, I've had autonomy in this one, transforming, roles of the veterinary technician, and using autonomy in the 5 functions of a purpose-driven team and all of that. But the question then is, you've described some of it, but is autonomy similar to and a part and product of leveraging your team? I mean, can they be, are they the same? Is it different?
It really depends if you trust your team. With the amount that we spend on our teams and invest in our teams, we should, the autonomy should be correlated to outcomes, right? Because they're experts and we're a team of professionals. And so I think a lack of autonomy often communicates something to your team, even if it's unsaid. You don't trust me. You don't trust me as an expert.
That's exactly right, Tom, because that's the exact thing that I was coming up to with myself when I was going back and forth with leveraging and autonomy. And it's based in trust, which is foundational to all relationships. So back to what Ivan was talking about how, standing over the top veterinarian, standing over the technician, is it because he doesn't trust that person? Is it because they really want it? I mean, what's the point there? And I think that trust is at the foundation of most all the things we talked about today, to be honest. in building that psychological safety, being leveraged to the max, delivering the autonomy, allowing for mastery. I'm a veterinarian. Let's put on my, if I were to have a veterinarian hat, I'm the veterinarian and I want my team to master all the skills so that I too can be leveraged to my max, right? Oh my gosh, nothing gets me driving. Well, there's a few things, but leveraging everyone on the team to their maximum potential has been a conversation of mine since 2001, believe it or not. So that's a very complex conversation and there's a lot to it. I think if we just simplified it and helped teams in training, trust, communications, but everybody's like, oh, we have no time for that. Well, if you don't make the time for that, guess what? You're going to keep churning, burning, turning, and the turnover is going to continue to be high.
Well, having no time for that is part of the reason the trust doesn't form, right? And it's trust is reciprocal. It's important for someone on the receiving end, for that vet tech with the vet sort of breathing down their neck, to understand it's not all on them. When we say that the vet doesn't trust the vet tech, part of the lack of trust is the vet doesn't trust themselves. They don't trust that they have the time to do a good job here. So it's a two-way street there. And are we giving them the time and the space to create the environment where trust can be nurtured and built and developed over time? Or are they all operating at the absolute limit of their capacity to operate? So they're feeling like, I need those blood results now. And it might be that the truth is they trust that vet tech more than anyone else in the world to get those blood results as quickly as possible. But that is not sufficient for them not to be sort of standing over the vet tech and waiting for them.
It's a vicious cycle, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And, it really reminds me a lot of stuff that is related to the workflow. And Rebecca, when you were talking about the working at the top of everybody's licenses, a lot of people talk about that. But I worked as a locum or relief vet for many, many years. And it is way simpler for you if you walk into the hospital and you just trust that people that work here, they know what they're doing, they have their workflow, and you have to blend in. And how many vets I've seen that walk as a relief veterinarian and say, well, this is how we're going to anesthetize animals here because I'm a doctor. Every time I walked into the hospital, I think that's why I had such a success in blending with the team, because I was always coming in and saying, look, you guys do whatever you do here, and I'll just blend in, your anesthesia protocols. All I need is that there's a dental. It needs to be under. If you have questions, ask me. Otherwise, that's your job, and I know you do it right. And then on all of the positions, and if you do that, then you can really maximize your team because they're going to be doing everything you need, and you're just going to be running between the rooms and then the people that you work with. So the more trust, the more autonomy, the more productive you are, but then it's more satisfying to people that do the work with you. Otherwise, they look at you, a tyrant that's staring at, no, that's not how you take blood. No, that's not how you, do this or intubate the pet or anything like that. So there's so many components that come with it and trusting your team.
And I think within that,
sorry, go on, Rebecca.
I think within that piece of autonomy too, it's like, this is the final product. This is the desired expectation and a place of excellence that within our veterinary hospital, this is what this looks like. You, in your autonomy and your skill sets, you get to bring us to that point. As long as we reach that point of excellence for our team and we fully defined that, go for it.
Yeah, and I think we're arriving at the true cost of staff churn, right? That when you lose a team member, there are all these ways that are very hard to measure that you're losing something. And one of those things that you lose is trust. And that needs to be built with a new team member. And that takes time and effort and money and has all kinds of consequences.
And trust is measurable. I read a book years ago. So hold on a second. Let me find The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. Is fabulous. It brought together that point that I knew as a technician in my gut that if I was trusted, that I was more efficient, we were more cost effective and all of that. And it comes down to having, hold on a second, dividends and taxes, and trust is measurable. So even when we come back to what are we going to measure and how are we going to ask our team different things within these surveys, it's something we don't talk about. We explicitly want it and we need it. Our clients expect it, to that trust. But starting off a conversation with what is trust for us and our team? How can we measure it?
Yeah, you talked about You talked about 360-degree reviews where the team members are giving feedback to each other. Rebecca, we do that at PetsApp, and two of the questions we ask is, I feel trusted. To what extent do you agree with these statements? I feel trusted by the pack, the PetsApp pack, the PetsApp pack. I trust the PetsApp pack. So there's this reciprocity. So I feel trusted and I trust them. And just asking that and saying, how much are we trading in trust within this? And one of the interview questions we ask in one of the later stages in the interview rounds is questions along the lines of, when was the last time you told a lie and did you get away with it? Or how many lies have you told in this interview? And so you have the culture, which is quite a pointed question, but to us, complete transparency is really important. Cutting out the sort of second guessing what do people mean and having to read between the lines is part of how we move fast. And so saying we understand that in everyday life, everyone tells, little white lies and that sort of thing, inconsequential lies, but we really try and tell it like it is. And this is how we communicate here. So for some people that will make them feel too exposed and too vulnerable, they're the people that wouldn't want to work at PetsApp. But for people that want to work here and are going to thrive here, we just like to tell each other how it is, and we're comfortable with fairly kind but direct communication.
Makes sense. We have a great comment from Oliver. Is an idea hiring someone who brings an outsider's perspective to shake things up, not to have a monoculture that has stopped learning and improving. And I can't agree more than that. I remember I took a job in Powell River, which is in north of sort of British Columbia, where there's 2 vet clinics, and one of the owners had a stroke, so I had to replace. They were looking for someone, so it was a remote place, beautiful place. So I went there, and there was no second opinion. It was like such a small village with 2 vets, and they would never agree with each other. It was just interesting environment, but without having outside perspective brought into the practice and such a sort of monarchy that was there. And then as it turned out, when I started working with them, there was multiple shockers, but for the last 20 years, they were working with this one person. And every time they would ask a question and say, hey, why did you do it this way? The answer was, because I'm a vet and you're a technician. And that's why. I was like, what? That's some culture. So definitely having someone walking from outside and bringing that breath of fresh air is always important.
Sorry, Ivan. We talk about that when we're hiring. Now, is this person culturally neutral or culturally advancing? Do you think they're going to challenge and advance our culture in a way that's going to take us all forward? So the culture is a lived experience, and we talk about it again as if a company has one culture. But actually, every individual within the company has a different experience of that company's culture. Now, the more aligned you are, hopefully the experience gets less different. But at no point does the culture become homogenous. Everyone experiences it. The way you live your values is going to be experienced differently by each individual.
It's a great comment. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, Ivan, can you clarify that question for me? Because what I'm visualizing is we've got a culture and this person wants to bring in someone to shake it up. Well, wouldn't that be a consultant or coach? Or does he really want someone to come in and be hired? Yeah. So
I think it's both. I think it's from what Thom said. When you're hiring, think about, you don't fit into our culture, then you're not a fit, but maybe this is a new perspective that's coming in. And I think the other perspective is that when you have like a relief veterinarian coming in, and all of a sudden you're seeing that someone loves the vet that is coming in and doesn't get along with the vet that is working already in your clinic, well, maybe there's something different that you need to learn about that vet that's coming in. What are they doing different? And that's what I've seen repeatedly with being a relief vet. When you're coming in and giving full autonomy to technicians and just say, look, I'm here for 2 days. I have to blend in with what you do.
And
I mean, everybody
like
that's great. Yeah. And then, so then you're not liked by the local veterinarians because they think you're competing with them for something. But
to my point is that if I'm managing a team, okay, and I'm looking to bring in somebody to shake it up, man, I better be telling my team I'm bringing in somebody to shake it up, or this is going to fail miserably. I just, I think we have to.
There's a super geeky evolutionary biology take on this that I think is going to be helpful for some of the audience, right? Where in very dynamic, fast, paced, changing environments where you're not doing very well, having a high rate of mutation, being very mutable, changing rapidly is advantageous. You're trying to find your niche. You're trying to find an ecological niche that you can fit into and benefit from and thrive, right? So if things are going terribly wrong and you have no idea what to do, maybe hiring someone in to shake things up a bit is a bit of a last-ditch attempt, because we all know mutation is usually detrimental to the organism. It's usually that's not an advantageous mutation and you die, right? But if you're going to die anyway, okay, try it, right? But in where you found your niche and you're thriving and things are going well, having a relatively lower rate of mutation is the right evolutionary strategy. So the idea that you're just going to take the risk of saying, I'm just going to hire anyone because anyone could shake things up and it could have a positive outcome, that's like the opposite of strategy. And as a tactic, it's generally not one that's going to work well. That's not the same as saying everyone is the same around here and we need to be homogenous and we don't interrogate our culture and we don't look to improve. Those are different things. But I think it's a very slippery slope to just say, hey, let's mix it up a bit. It feels like that's not going to, unless you're in a very dynamic, fast-changing environment and you don't feel like you're onto a winner yet, having a very high rate of mutation is rarely the right thing for an organization to do.
You reminded me about the case that we were looking at. I don't remember which restaurant chain. It was a very high upper end restaurant chain, and they were Michelin graded. And in their strategy, because kitchen is a very set workflow, and specifically to certain dishes. So you have to have all your steps outlined depending on what are your main courses usually in this restaurant. So what they were doing about once in 3 years, they were committing to a major event, major like presidents meeting together and stuff like that, and then breaking the kitchen completely, adopting a completely new menu and setting the timeline within 9 months to prepare towards that. And that was a part of a culture of continuous improvement where they wanted to keep things dynamic, not we always done things this way, which is usually sort of go to in the veterinary clinics. Why are you doing this stupid thing? Well, because we always have done that.
And that's appropriate. That's appropriate to the ecological niche that they're in, where the average restaurant fails within 3 years. And so having a high mutation rate, because what people select for in the restaurant that they go to is novelty. You talk about we talk about the new British food place that's opened up around the corner. Very few British food restaurants out there, unfortunately. Yeah, some fish and chips. But you get what I mean. You go to the new place, and after a while that goes stale, and you look for a new place. And so what they're solving for in a restaurant context, the innovator's dilemma of how do we avoid being disrupted? Well, let's do some creative destruction of our own and let's destroy ourselves. It's not really the right model for a veterinary practice where the average customer lifetime is going to be 10 years plus.
That's right. Yep. Well, I want to shift to mastery. So we talked about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So on the mastery side of things, and this is essentially becoming better at what you do. And I think that not only that we read it from Daniel Pink that it's required, but our licensing requires continuous improvement. So continuous education is a part of it. But are there tricks to improve that? Because I'm sort of sick of, this CE requirement. Everybody hates that. And it's such a contrast because vets are nerds by nature. I find that they just love studying. And then they spend 8 years of their life studying. And then when they come out, I think it's just such a depreciated thing that people actually like doing, where it's what's your CE allowance and you have to do it. So I think that's a part of that intrinsic motivation because people like to study. But what's your take on CE as a part of this mastery? And would people want to do it more if it was sort of pitched differently or set up as a different framework?
I'll tackle that one. So even as a credentialed veterinary technician, I have been required for continuing education my entire career as well. And I think what happens too is, yes, we go to CE and we mark it down that we've gone. For me, it's typically a combination of interpersonal skills, practice management, and technical skills, because I know that that's what I need personally. I do believe that as a practice manager, I would want to work with my team to determine where do they want to grow their career and how can, through continuing education, we mark off all of these things that we need. You need the CE, and it needs to apply to how are you going to grow within our practice and how is this going to benefit our pets, our clients, us as a team, and the veterinary practice. And so really looking at the continuing education in a whole to advance all of us. So it's just not a very individual siloed piece. It's part of that mission saying, and vision and values that we grow our team. We grow our team in continuing education, online training within our practice. Continuing education can look like so much. Statistically, yeah, we need to have these race approved classes, state approved, Providence approved classes, but there's ways that it can impact our team and our clients and the services we provide. So it's a broader approach. And as a practice manager, I really took that to heart, and I had those conversations with my teams.
Yeah, I think we can be too transactional in our approach to learning once we qualify within veterinary medicine. And it's, I do this training or this learning and I get this CE credit, and now I'm expected to be able to perform this task. Whereas I think one great thing that I would encourage veterinary clinics to do is to have a book club, right? And it's just incredible the things that you can learn together from books. You just think of some of the non-obvious insights that you can extract, that if someone put you on the spot and said, now do your reflective learning exercise and tell me what you learned from the book. You put me on the spot, I'm not sure what Thomas Hardy's Far From the Madding Crowd has to teach me about running a software business. But actually, there's a section in it where the farmer it gives too much of the plot away maybe, so if you pretend to read it, pause now or whatever. But the farmer lost his farm and he goes to find a job, and he dresses up as a shepherd and he's going to take a job as a shepherd. But at the market, everyone's looking for a farm manager. So he traipses back into town, he sells his shepherd's crook, and he gets all the clothing and accoutrement of being a farm manager. And he goes back to the marketplace, and no one wants a farm manager anymore. They all want a shepherd. And there's a line in there about rather than going there set in what you think the market wants, why not go and find out what the market wants and then adapt to the situation? So it's teaching this thing of product market fit 200 years before that was ever even spoken about, or 150 years before it's ever spoken about. So there's non-obvious insights that we can extract together when we don't try and come at learning so directly. Now, of course, you either know how to do a surgery or you don't know how to do a surgery, but it's not all just super transactional. There's non-obvious learnings that we can go through together, and that can build culture, that can build trust, that can build a collective memory bank of experiences that we can bring to bear against the common mission that we have in an organization.
I think all team members have opportunities for mastery and being able to improve and elevate within their own personal and professional careers. Again, working as a practice manager, supporting our receptionists, our technicians, our assistants, our veterinarians in all that they want to do. Now, I think some of the challenge is within veterinary hospitals, how do I grow? Sometimes those practice managers don't know all of the opportunities either. So as a team member, I need to be able to, so I think you mentioned being a reliever. I did relief work as a veterinary technician too. Nothing to open your mind and broaden your opportunities by understanding how other veterinary teams do this. Reminds me that at Town and Country, we actually had a tech swap because it was a small community, small 5,000 people in the middle of rural Colorado. And so I would go out to about 60 miles away, go to another veterinary hospital in Montrose, and we had tech swaps because it was just a way for me and us in a smaller community to understand how other people were doing it. This sounds very innovative now that I'm thinking about it in the 90s, what we used to do. But back to this idea that team members need to learn how to grow and be creative too, because those practice managers don't always know and understand how to grow you.
Taking some charge of your own learning. Yeah, I like that. And what you're describing there, when we're talking about mutability within a business, one of the safer ways to imbue mutability within your business is to adopt the strategy of bacteria where they swap plasmids, right? Little bits of DNA, they swap it back and forth. It reminds me exactly of that, this vet tech swap. And back to that question from Oliver, I think it was, saying, how can you bring in someone to shake things up a bit? Well, if we're just doing a tech swap, it's temporary. It's not permanent. So the team can't be too offended by what's going on here, but maybe they learn something along the way. So I love that, Rebecca. I think that's great.
I know we're at the top of the hour, but I want to add this too. So what we're designing in Galaxy right now is actually exactly what Rebecca, what you were doing. We're looking at not that we have employees in the clinic, but in a region, which we call solar system, just because we're nerds. But basically the scheduling is actually going to be set up for the region. So you could take a shift in a GP hospital, 2 shifts in ER because you love it, and 2 shifts at home in telemedicine. So you mix and match. And then the same for technicians and the doctors to rotate if they want. It's not a requirement, but if you like to experience new environments, you can have 2 shifts here, 2 shifts here, 1 shift here. And then that drives the quality internally, because you can rate the vet that's coming into multiple hospitals, and you can rate the hospital by multiple people going into that hospital. So you're creating this sort of internal quality assurance program, as well as this novelty, and as well as this experience sharing. So that's in our design, which we think is a bit innovative, but turns out that you discovered it long term before us.
Well,
I do
you're
wanna-
taking it to the next level. And when I saw Galaxy Vets, all I could think was, guardians of the galaxy, guardians of the veterinary community. So I do love
Hopefully.
it.
Like that. That's nice.
Of the industry. I do want to add the last thing probably to it, but I don't know if we have time to expand on this. But the third thing that Daniel Pink talks about is the purpose, and we already touched on that, and Rebecca, that the purpose is really important. So if you don't have the purpose in the organization and a North Star that everybody wants to thrive towards, you need to define it, because otherwise you're not leading people in the same direction. And just to kind of wrap up, I just want to sort of very quickly mention a couple of things that are out there to measure, and just to have a little peace of mind. So essentially, you can measure things like workload and assess it on a regular basis and see if it's overwhelming. Salary is the measure. Non-monetary rewards like CE and benefits. Emotional rewards like recognition. How often do you recognize? And then measuring things like how much people exercise, meditate, diet, water, sleep, mental health, and employee assistance programs. So there's many things that you can measure to assess the team culture and the well-being. But all of this needs to be not the vanity metrics that you're looking at on a regular basis and saying, hey, we had the heaviest cat this month, then heavier than last month. But what do we do about it? Nothing. It's a cool fact. So I want to thank you for participating in this. Pleasure to see you, Thom, again. And Rebecca, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We also just sort of a public announcement. We stood up a foundation from Galaxy. It's called Galaxy Vets Foundation. Essentially, today we're running a project that is helping people in Ukraine that find pets on the streets, or just people that can't find veterinary clinics during the state of war. So just find it, Galaxy Vets Foundation. If you're a technician or veterinarian, you can donate time. You can actually spend an hour or two in telemedicine, which is we have an onboarding process, and you just, sitting on the couch watching TV with your kids, and could be answering for an hour or two to people that are inquiring. And it's been very popular. We're helping a lot of people. And there's also a donation for the pets. What we do, we use the finances to buy food within Ukraine. So we're actually supporting businesses that still can function, and then that food is sent to shelters where people under shelling and in the war situation are helping pets. So just sort of a public announcement there. So if you're interested, Galaxy Vets Foundation, look into it. I'm really, really grateful for you guys taking the time. I know you're all busy, and thank you for listeners to participate in, and the participants, Thom and Rebecca.
Thank you.